Good day, everyone. My name's Mike LaCorte, and welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast. Leaders Podcast gives me the opportunity to speak to some of the most influential leaders in the investigation and intelligence space. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Brian King, who's the CEO of King's International Advisory Group, based in Canada. Welcome, Brian. It's a pleasure to have you on today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Yeah, sorry.
Fantastic. Could you briefly just introduce yourself? I know you've been in the industry a long time, but it'd be nice to get a bit of an understanding of who you are.
As Mike said, President and CEO of King International Advisory Group. We're a private investigation firm located in Canada. I've been in the industry for a very long time. I started in 1979 when I first became licensed as a private investigator, and have had a very wonderful career over the last several decades in this profession.
Oh, fantastic. 1979. So what was it like back then investigating in Canada?
Well, it was interesting. We were coming through a bit of a dark age. You know, Canada's had fairly rigid licensing practices since probably dating back to the 50s, actually. And so, starting out was a little bit different than it is today in Canada. You had to get licensed and apprentice under a agency, and you were sort of attached to that agency at the time. And we had a period just prior to that where it was like the Wild West for private investigators, and there was a few high-profile investigators that actually ran afoul of the law and got charged. So I came into it at a time when the industry had a bit of a tarnish on it, and I've spent my entire career, and I think quite successfully, changing the face of private investigations in Canada, to bringing it around to the professionalism that it's now recognized. I'm very pleased that I've had the opportunity to work in this field in Canada, because we've done quite a bit of work, Mike, towards professionalizing the industry to the extent where we're recognized by government agencies. And actually, our firm is, retained by various government agencies, unlike some countries in the world that I've seen that are in, a rather regimented government where they don't even recognize private investigations. And so I'm very pleased that I've had this opportunity over 5 decades to bring about some massive changes in the way investigations are seen here in Canada.
Excellent. It's one of my something I talk about quite regularly is the private-public synergy between different jurisdictions and how law enforcement interacts with the private sector. So your firm actually has a relationship with the government? Do you work together, or how to explain that a little bit? Because each jurisdiction that I've spoken to have real different views. Some are closer than others. Some are not even recognized, like you said earlier.
We run into a little bit of competitive jealousy with law enforcement, but our firm has actually been retained in the last while by the Federal Attorney General's office, the Provincial Attorney General's office, on matters, in particular federal, where there's a conflict with the RCMP, et cetera.
Oh, right.
But that took a long time coming, and we had to work through it. And my attitude, and I convinced many of my colleagues here in Canada, the same attitude was, rather than run from it, hit it face on and try and work with government. So we've done quite a bit of lobbying over the years, and media presentations to show the professionalism. We're retained on an almost daily basis by regulatory bodies, and we've become, and again, there's a bit of work that has to be done to convince the public, et cetera, of our needs, but we've been very successful in changing that appearance from the cloak and dagger private investigator to the professional agency that has a real purpose in society right now. I think it's not unlike several other countries. Budgets for police departments have gone down instead of up in a lot of cases, and white collar
Mm,
crime is
mm,
not a priority anymore. And so we filled
yeah,
that niche for, like I say, regulatory bodies and law firms, et cetera, that need to put together a case for prosecution on white collar crime. So we assist quite a bit, and that's a very lucrative field in our industry at assisting the various bodies with pro-prosecutionary type of work, because law enforcement just doesn't have the resources and time to cover all these areas right now.
sure. So you do the investigative work and present it in a format that law enforcement would accept, or the judicial review would accept, or the court system would accept.
Exactly. We try and put a bow around the box and
Yeah.
present it to them. 90% of the time it works. Sometimes the law enforcement agencies are reluctant to
Mm,
rely on that, but that's becoming a rarity here, as
mm,
opposed to
mm.
the norm. Uh, um, and we still run into cases where law enforcement, for whatever reason, may be reluctant, because we have various jurisdictional type police agencies here, especially in the Greater Toronto area. We probably, within a arm's throw, we have 6 different police agencies that we have to deal with,
Oh, wow.
because of the growing sprawl of the Greater Toronto area. And 5 out of the 6 are great to work with. It's that type of thing. Um,
Sure.
yeah.
How big is the private sector investigation market then? Do you have a number of investigating agencies or
It
licensed investigators
Well,
operating?
the barrier to entry changed in 2005 here in my province of Ontario, where they went to portable licensing. So we have a
Right.
lot of people that will get licensed, but they don't practice. So the numbers are a little askew as to how many are practicing. I can tell you that I built my firm up from the original firm in 1984 to 400 employees and 26 offices across the country, and
Wow.
revenue sales of over 70 million a year. Um, and I sold that off to equity investment back in 2000, and over a period of time back in 2014, and we opened this more boutique firm called King International Advisory Group in 2015. But we were probably one of the largest at the time, and but there were several others that were close as well. So
Mm.
I at one time I did know that number, Mike, but we're definitely probably in the 200 to 300 million dollars a year in revenue for our industry or more, and that's not including security side. Where we often
Mm.
get grouped in just by
Yeah.
legislative issues with the security field, but the private investigation field, fairly lucrative in Canada. Anybody that puts their mind to it can be very successful at this field.
Sure. And the licensing requirements, are they nationwide, or is it independent states have separate licensing requirements or application?
Well, so Canada has 10 provinces, and each province regulates separately their own private investigation. But the provinces have um, correlated together, and the licensing and requirements are very similar in each province. So the process you go through to get licensed in each province is very similar. They've over the last 20 years, they've really upgraded the requirements with licensing. For example,
Mm,
in all provinces, you can't be a licensed private investigator if you have a criminal record. Um, you have to take a mandatory government course.
mm,
You have to fulfill all the licensing requirements. The government agencies in most provinces have auditors that also go out and visit the offices of the private investigators to ensure that they're compliant. So every year or two, we get a visit by the government agency, ensuring that we're compliant to record keeping and that type of thing. So we do have to keep notes and records of our investigations. They don't interfere with us.
mm.
The here in Ontario, the ministry, as long as you're following the guidelines and keeping to the rules of the law, they're great to work with, actually.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think I like the checks and balances in place in order to become a licensed practicing investigator. Talk to me a little bit about international work. Are you? I know you guys are based and you cover the whole of Canada. Do you venture further afield?
Oh yeah, we've I think over the course of my career, we've sort of specialized in working outside of the country. That's why I've been so actively involved with the Council of Private Investigators. And I personally do quite a bit of human rights cases. So I remember when we opened this practice in 2015. Within 2 weeks, I got assigned a human rights case that took me for 6 weeks to Nepal and India. And my poor
Fantastic.
partners, we had just opened the doors, and I had to leave for 6 weeks to work on this very important case in India and Nepal. So and I do a lot of work in South America and the Caribbean because we have a couple of international resorts that use us for major catastrophic events. So been to Cuba 5 times on assignments. Places like that where it's been a very interesting. I got asked in 2017 to go to Indonesia to reinvestigate the Briax gold scandal, which is the case where the one of the executives of the firm ended up either falling or jumping from or being thrown from a helicopter back many years ago. It was the largest gold fraud case in world history at the time,
Oh, wow.
$40 billion in
Oh, wow.
stock fraud, and that took me into the jungles of Indonesia and Borneo. I actually met the Sultan of Borneo and I had a good meeting and chat with him. And so I've seen a lot. I've been to a lot of countries. There's very few that I haven't been to as a result of this work, and it just you never know when something's going to come in the door that's going to take you, you know, take you away to
Yeah.
another foreign country.
So when you're traveling to all these countries and some of the jurisdictions you've mentioned are quite challenging to work in practically, do you source local support and how do you do that?
I do that. I always like to have what I call a fixer in each of the countries. Some of them it's difficult because some of the countries that I've traveled to don't recognize private investigations.
Mm,
I mean, we have to go in as consultants or media or some other type of pretense because private investigations are not allowed
sure.
in the countries. I know in the case of Nepal, it was difficult, but I actually eventually found one person there that acted as a private investigator that was able to at least give me the lay of the land. But
Mm.
I usually find someone because, even transportation in some of these countries can be difficult, you know, an example in Nepal, when you have to go to some of these jungle towns, the roads
Yeah.
are just horrible. So you have to have the right people there to assist you. But so far, I've been very fortunate in having some great support on the ground in these countries.
Sure. No, I get it. Um, Associations. Let's talk a little bit about investigation associations. I know you're a long-term member of CII, and you've been. I just found out earlier that you've been president twice. So not only did you go through the chairs once, you went back for more. Talk to me a little bit about how important trusted partners through associations are, and why you
Well,
would join these types of associations.
initially it was for just what we had discussed, for having contacts in different
Yeah.
countries. And I found the Council of International Investigators one of the best groups to belong to because of their vetting process and the fact that membership into that organization, you have to be an owner or management level of a licensed private investigation agency. So the caliber of the membership is good. And they've been expanding over the years to fill voids in many countries. And
Mhm.
so I found it invaluable for a number of reasons, not only the contacts and one of the reasons I went through the chairs, and actually went through them twice, as you mentioned, Mike, is that it forced you to attend their annual general meetings and their midterm meetings. So I find it's invaluable to attend these meetings, to actually meet face to face the people that you might deal with someday,
Mhm.
to give your own personal assessment of not only capabilities but integrity and that type of thing. So, I encourage any new investigators to get it, that are getting into the field, to join a recognized organization like CII or WAD or some of the other ones that are out there, and to attend the meetings and to meet people, because it really opens your horizons. Most of the meetings that these organizations arrange have a seminar and educational component. And
Mhm.
Mike, anybody that tells you that you're not always learning in this field is lying to you.
Yeah,
We learn
completely.
every day. This industry is, the best education you can get, because you're always having to learn something about a new field every almost every day. So the educational component, being able to keep up with what's going on internationally and throughout the world, it helps, because you need to know prior to going into some of these countries what the rules of that land are. And so I find them invaluable.
Yeah, completely agree. You've hit all the right points there in terms of association, network building, and international capability. Being able to provide that to your clients. Um, what would you say to a young investigator, Brian, that's looking to come into the industry? That's because what we've seen, and maybe it's the same or different in Canada, but this side of the pond in Europe, where it used to be when I started a second or third career for people in the private sector. What I mean by that is people leaving the police, the law enforcement, or military would come out and then start a career in private professional investigation work. We've seen now people choosing this as a first career, so coming into industry a lot younger with a differing type of skill set. Maybe with background in law, maybe journalism, banking, or any other life skills. What would you say to a younger investigator that's listening to this, thinking, yeah, I'd like to
My,
become a
my
private
my first
investigator.
reaction is the sky is the limit. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm sort of an oddity and an example of what you said, because back when I came into the industry in the late '70s, okay, it was like you said, it was a bit of a cottage industry where people were coming in
Mm.
from a second career in either law enforcement or some other type of related field. I got into it right out of taking a criminology program, and sort of fell onto it by accident because my original intentions was to get into law enforcement, but at the time I couldn't find a police agency that I was satisfied with was hiring. And so I
Right.
apprenticed as a private investigator and decided to, much to my chagrin, or my father's chagrin, I decided to stay with it. I got accepted at a police agency, a small police agency about 4 years later, and had to make a decision. I decided to stay with it. And my parents thought I was making a mistake because they thought a government position with a pension later would be the best.
Yeah.
And I sort of proved them wrong over the years because, had I stayed in law enforcement, I don't think I would have been as successful
Mm.
as I have. But my again, I didn't have my sights set on 26 offices and 400 employees when I got into the field, but I knew that I was going to grow a successful business. And that was my intention. And it just all came together because I was driven to provide the best professionalism that I could in the industry.
Mm.
Money has always been secondary to me. It's providing a first class service to my clients, which
Mm.
drives me. Um, and I always want a client to be satisfied with the results. Whether the results end up positive or negative, I want to make
Mm.
sure that
Mm.
they know that we have done the best job that we can. Um, it's kind of funny because most of my work, Mike, has been pro-prosecutionary, white-collar crime work. But in the early days, I was
Right.
doing a lot of criminal defense work as well. And eventually that morphed into doing pro bono work for what at that time was called the Association of Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, which is now called Innocence Canada, of which the famous Hurricane Carter was one of the directors of. And
Mm.
so I started doing pro bono work for them. And there's nothing more gratifying than using the skills that you've learned as a private investigator to work on those types of cases where truly there has been an injustice and somebody's been wrongfully convicted, and you're able to stay with that case to the point where a person is deemed innocent by the court and released. I had one case where it was a 14-year-old boy that was sentenced to hang by the name of Stephen Truscott, which is a very famous case in Canada. And it was a historical case dating back to the late 50s, early 60s. And Stephen was still alive and came to us and wanted to clear his name. He had done his sentence to hang was commuted to life imprisonment, had done his term in prison, and had got out and married and had children and
Mm. Mm.
led a very successful life under an assumed name. And around 2000, and I want to say around 2015 or so, he came forward to a well-known criminal lawyer in Canada saying, is it possible that we could, because he had heard about all the advances of DNA,
Mhm.
because the victim was a young girl who was raped and murdered, and have my name cleared through the DNA. He didn't know at the time, Mike, that the samples from that crime scene had been lost. Everything else had been preserved except for the semen stains and other types of evidence that may have been available to him. So right away we realized that a guilty man wouldn't have come because he had no idea that these samples had been lost by the Crown Attorney's office. And so we worked diligently through this historical case with the lawyers involved, and were able to eventually have him exonerated and actually rewarded financially
Fantastic.
by the government for the situation. So it's cases like that go to your heart to make you realize that it's not all about you. There's others out there that need your help, you know.
Yeah, completely. But to build a company of 400 employees, 26 offices is there must have been huge challenges along the way, Brian. That's not an easy thing to do. And, to get to that status is fantastic. What do you look for in young investigators? What skill sets do you look for when you're looking to increase your
Well,
team?
that may change depending on the need at the time, but I'm looking for talented people that are willing to think outside of the box, and again, the whole technical side of artificial intelligence and everything else is changing our industry. But I hold fast with the with um, with the premise that I have used for many years, and that is to surround myself by people smarter than me. And sometimes it's hard for people to admit that, but you know, um, um, that's what I've done. Is I surrounded myself with people that were far more brighter in some areas than I am, and
Mm,
I don't hold them back, and I allow there has to be a trust factor because I see a lot of my colleagues in
mm,
the industry never get past a 2 or 3 man operation because they don't trust anybody.
yeah,
And my feeling is if I hire you, I have to trust you, you know. And so once we've gone through that hiring process, I'm not afraid to hand the keys to the office to any one of my employees. In fact, they all have a key to the office. They that type of thing. And it's that trust
mm,
that you share with them gets turned back, and that allowed me to grow because I'm allowing my team to make decisions. And it
mm.
sort of morphed that way, Mike. It just it wasn't again, it wasn't a planned situation, but it worked out very successful.
Fantastic. What's next for King International Advisory Group? What's the next
It's funny. People ask me that, Mike, and one of the things I tell my colleagues in the industry here is that I'm not looking to grow to be the biggest anymore. I want to be known as the best, and you know, and we have I consider it a boutique firm, but we're now 50 full-time employees here.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we have a bit of a small lion to feed here, which is good. And we all of our staff members are employees; they're not contractors, and they all work for us. We do their payroll, source
Sure.
deductions, all that type of thing. So and we're quite happy with the with what we have here. Our goal now is to bring in more challenging cases. We're pretty fortunate that most of the high profile media cases in Canada somehow end up on our doorstep, which is
Mm.
which is quite exciting. I laugh because my wife says nobody should like the job as much as you do. I'm up at 5 in the morning and out the door at 6, and it's been that way for the past 50 years.
Fantastic. I want to finish off on this last question. You've had an amazing, successful career, Brian. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. But what qualities make a strong leader?
I think trust in his people. Um, um, I also feel that making a decision and living with decisions. I think that a leader can't be indecisive. Um, you have to make decisions and then you
Mm,
stand by those decisions, whether they're, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. Because I think that once you start hesitating on certain things, you tend to not move forward. And the other thing I think is financial, um, fiscal responsibility. In spite of our financial success over the years, we've always had the attitude of not spending more than we bring in. We've worked through both my previous, entity and this current one without having debt. Like, so I always encourage new leaders getting in an industry to be very careful when it comes to the financial side of things. Do not spend more money than you're bringing in, um, because that can get out of control. But I think just, having trust in your people and having faith in them and do as much mentoring as you can to the younger people getting into the industry, make it a positive experience for them. That's one of the attitudes I have here. I make a habit of going out and speaking to all of my staff that are in the office every day and having a conversation with them and making them feel part of a team. Because it really, when you're running an agency, it is a team. It's not a one-man band. And so that's about the best advice I can give.
Fantastic, Brian. It's been amazing having a conversation with you. Brian King's details are coming up on the screen now if you wish to make contact with him directly. You've been listening to another episode of Leaders Podcast.